Vincent Valentine, one of the most popular characters in Final Fantasy VII's universe, has had a pretty wild journey both narratively and conceptually, even when you compare him to most of the other characters in Final Fantasy VII's world. From being a character that was just a playable secret character, barely included in the original game due to time constraints, to now having been involved in every single piece of Final Fantasy VII's compilation, except for Remake so far. Side note, he's barely in Crisis Core, but I am counting it. You see his coffin, Zack opens it, sees a guy sleeping, who, if I remember right, we don't technically see on camera, but you know who it is. You know what they're hinting towards. But anyway, I digress. Today, I'm going to look over Vincent's overall story in the original continuity, and try to predict how things might go down for him in Remake's future. It's a little bit different than the other ones because he hasn't actually appeared in Remake himself, but we'll see what we can pull together. Don't forget to like, don't forget to sub, do all of the things, but let's crack on. Now, the first time that Vincent appears properly in the timeline is about 25 to 30 years before Final Fantasy VII takes place. At this stage, Vincent is a member of the Turks, where he's assigned to supervise the Genova project in Nibelheim. Over time, he falls in love with Lucretia Crescent, an assistant to Professor Gast, but he finds out the truth about Lucretia's connection to his father, Grimoire. She was there on the day that Grimoire died during the experiments with Chaos, and she knows everything that went down, and after this revelation, Lucretia distances herself from Vincent and ends up falling into a relationship with Professor Hojo. Lucretia becomes pregnant and Hojo plans to use the unborn child, as a test subject for the Genova project. Now, Vincent strongly objects to the use of humans as test subjects in general, especially Lucretia, who he cares about. So he confronts Hojo in the Shinra mansion, and after a little bit of a conflict, Vincent gets shot by Hojo in the chest. Now, this is where Hojo then proceeds to use Vincent's half-dead body as a test subject for his experiments. We all know what Hojo's like, we all know what Hojo likes to do. Now, these experiments made Vincent quite a bit stronger, but the experiments failed because he was still in a death-like state. You know, he didn't regenerate, he didn't heal. As a last resort to revive Vincent, Lucretia uses the knowledge that she has from the research into Chaos previously with Vincent's father, Grimoire, and infuses Vincent with Chaos, which is enough to bring him out of his death-like state and revive him. But Chaos was out of control, and Vincent wouldn't have been able to control the power of Chaos. So this is when Lucretia uses the proto-materia, fusing it with Vincent's chest, enabling him to control Chaos to a certain degree. It meant that Chaos wasn't going to rampage and go out of control or anything like that. Now, due to all of this, all the experiments and the combination with Chaos and the proto-materia, Vincent ends up acquiring some pretty superhuman abilities, such as amplified strength, speed, he can regenerate, he can kind of shapeshift a bit, there are other powers that he gets, and Vincent just kind of wakes up on an operating table and sees what's been done to him. Filled with guilt after the events described previously, Vincent locks himself in a coffin, and he feels like he holds a lot of the blame for everything that went down, and that he has to atone for his sins, which is what he does now by sleeping, like I say, in a casket in the Shinra mansion for around 20 years. And we do see him briefly in Crisis Core. Zack hears groaning emanating from a coffin in the Shinra mansion's basement. He opens it and he finds a sleeping person in the coffin. He decides to leave them alone, closes the casket, moves on with his day. And again, Vincent's sleep is disturbed during Before Crisis, Final Fantasy VII. It's not ended, but it is disturbed. There is a point in Before Crisis where the player Turk is searching for materia and documentation at the Shinra mansion, and then they eventually awaken Vincent, and Vincent and Vidot both recognise each other because they were both in the Turks at similar times. So Vincent ends up helping the Turks fight against Avalanche for a little while during Before Crisis. But after the events that he is involved in Before Crisis finish, he returns to his rest and goes back to sleep in the mansion. And for those of you that are keeping track, that's Crisis Core and Before Crisis that he's appeared in, and now we're going to hit Final Fantasy VII. So Cloud and the party discover Vincent in the same room in the basement of the Shinra mansion in Nibelheim, and Cloud tells him what's going on, tells him about Sephiroth. This kind of leaves Vincent convinced that he now holds more guilt and more sin, and sees it as something else that he has to atone for. But as the party leave, Vincent reconsiders, and I feel like it's definitely this burning revenge that he's got for Hojo. Like, even though he blames himself, he blames Hojo more, because Hojo's the one that actually did all of these things. From Vincent's perspective, he just wasn't strong enough to stop any of these things. That's where his guilt comes from. And Cloud confirms, yeah, we probably will bump into Hojo at some point, and Vincent's in. Vincent comes along with the party, and his goal is to get Hojo. That is his goal. If he can stop Sephiroth as well, bonus, and he isn't fully invested in that mission, but Hojo is his target. Now, one of the main things that happens with Vincent in the game is when you find Lucretia. She asks Vincent about Sephiroth, and Vincent, tries to spare Lucretia from the pain of what Sephiroth has become, and says that Sephiroth died. Now, during the Midgar raid, if you've got Vincent in your party when you confront Hojo, you get some dialogue where Hojo thought of Lucretia as a tool, and if there was any doubt in Vincent's mind whether or not he was going to deal with Hojo, that kind of washed it away. And in this scene, you defeat Hojo and continue with everything that's going on in Midgar. Now, after the final battle with Sephiroth at the end of the game, Vincent and Yuffie return to Midgar early to help evacuate the city before Meteor hits. He appears briefly in On the Way to a Smile, but the main thing that occurs is when Vincent meets Red 13 at the Forgotten City. Red 13's kind of got this fear that due to his long lifespan that he's going to lose everyone that he loves, he's going to have to see the people that he cares about die, and he's going to be the one that's left alone. But Vincent kind of reveals to him that I'm pretty much in the same boat, as he is pretty much immortal. So the two of them kind of arrange this annual meeting at Midgar, so that even if they've been separated on other sides of the planet, they still come together and they still support each other, which I think is a really nice character moment for both of them. But during the year following Final Fantasy VII, Vincent travelled the world, he retrieves information, he helps people where he can. And then we come to Advent Children, where after Sung and Elena were struck down, Vincent's the one that helps them out and gets them away from the remnants of Sephiroth at the North Crater. He gets as much information as he can. That's very much what Vincent's bag is at the moment. He's kind of going around and he's learning as much as he can. He's picking up that information. And again, when the leader of the remnants, Kadaj, fights Cloud in the Forgotten City during Advent Children, Vincent rushes in, opens fire, gets Cloud out of trouble. So Vincent's very much, he's gone from being, in the early parts of his story, he had his morals and he stood by his morals, but he was weak. Then in the OG, he's pretty strong and he's getting there, but, he kind of falls into the mix with the rest of the party quite a bit. But then by the time you get to Advent Children, Vincent's saving people, is gathering vital information. It seems like by the time you reach Advent Children, Vincent started coming to terms with everything and starting to realise where he can be useful and how he can be useful, much more than he ever did before. I mean, Vincent's the one that tells Cloud about Geostigma and about the return of Sephiroth coming very soon, probably. Vincent's the one that kind of gets that information to Cloud. And again, he shows up with the rest of Avalanche at the end of Advent Children for the battle against Bahamut Sin, and he's with the rest of the party when Cloud, again, takes Sephiroth out of the game. So that's Advent Children, the OG, before Crisis, and Crisis Core. Crisis Core's the loosest one because you don't technically see him, but he is in it. He is in it. But now we reach Vincent's big moment, Dirge of Cerberus. So about a year after the events of Advent Children, we get Dirge. Vincent is in Calm as the town falls under attack by a mysterious group of soldiers. He's confronted by a man named Azul, who demands to know the location of the proto-material, which, if I remember correctly, Vincent's like, what? What are you on about? After the battle, after Calm's been secured and everything like that, Vincent meets up with Reeve, and Reeve tells Vincent about soldiers from Deep Ground, which is a group that were created by experiments underneath the Shinra headquarters throughout all of the time, pretty much, that the story and the narrative of Final Fantasy VII has been going on. We see a scene in Crisis Core involving people from Deep Ground, so this has been going on for years. This is not a new thing. Vincent heads to Midgar and he finds Edge pretty much deserted. He meets another one of this group who are called the Sviets, called Rosso the Crimson, who also demands the proto-materia, as Deepground need it to control the final weapon, Omega. Not long after this, Vincent learns about Lucretia's connection to Omega and Chaos, and the experimentation and the testing that they did, and so Vincent heads to the Shinra Mansion in Nibelheim to find more answers, where he does find more of Lucretia's data on Omega, and after this, he gets ambushed by Rosso again, Rosso the Crimson. At this point, Rosso the Crimson removes the proto-materia from Vincent's chest, but Yuffie comes in, saves the day, rescues Vincent. Loads of things go on to happen here. There are loads of attacks by Deepground on like the World Regenesis Organization, I think it was called. We meet the leader of Deepground, which is Vice. And throughout the game, we're just learning more and more information about Omega, what it is, what the concept of it is, what it does, why the planet created it. And we also learn about Chaos's connection. And as the game progresses, Vincent begins to start losing control of Chaos. And he finds out that this is because the proto-materia that he had, which was taken by Rosso, was the thing that was allowing him to control Chaos. So the mission becomes Vincent needs to get the proto-materia back, and they need to stop Omega being summoned. Now this goes quite well. Vincent takes down all of the Deepground members, but eventually he gets to Vice, who has been digitally possessed by Hojo, who, yeah, he kind of like uploaded his mind basically. And the plan is for him to, he had originally planned to get the perfect body by merging himself with Genova cells and then merging with Omega. So the logic is that when all life on the planet is threatened, Omega and Chaos are both born. Chaos is there to send all life to the life stream, and then after that Omega takes the incoming life stream and the energy, all of the accumulated energy, and leaves, and flies off into space, and finds a new planet, and the cycle of life continues. And at this stage, Vincent nearly transforms into Chaos, but he's kind of held back by people showing pictures of Lucretia, and kind of urge him to take control of Chaos's power while he's still in his human form. Vincent defeats Vice Hojo, then Nero, another member of the Spheres, merges with Vice, and that's the death of Hojo then. Hojo's gone. At this point, Hojo is officially dead. But, unfortunately, as Vincent turns into Chaos, Omega is summoned. Now, we do get the proto-materia back. We do get it back to Vincent, which allows him to regain control of Chaos. So he's able to fight with control. Now the fight continues. Vincent eventually defeats Omega Vice, and then Omega itself begins to ascend and leave the planet. Vincent tries to stop it, but then everything seems to be disintegrated. And no one knows where Vincent's gone, until about a week later where he's found alive and well in Lucretia's cave, trying to make amends, and at this point he's forgiven himself. And that's it. That is well, I say that's it, but that is possibly the largest original continuity that we will do for any character. I think maybe Sephiroth probably would be slightly larger, but yeah, Vincent is involved in everything. Literally everything. He's there or thereabouts at some point. And this brings up the question. The big question. What does the unknown journey entail for Vincent? Because this is what we're on now. We're on an unknown journey. It says it right at the end of the game. And with Vincent, that's more true than ever, potentially. We can comfortably assume that everything up to Final Fantasy VII Remake happens identically to how it did in the original game. There's been no indication that there's been a changing point prior to that, so we can assume that Vincent's story pans out exactly as it does up until the point of Final Fantasy VII. That may change. We may get some stuff added into Remake that kind of says, no, this happened 10 years ago, and that was when the timeline was diverged. We don't know. We'll find that out as time goes on. But for now, all we can do, based off what we see and what we've got, is assume that Vincent's story, up until this point at the very least, is exactly the same. So all the Crisis Core stuff happens, all the before Crisis stuff happens, all the stuff with Hojo and Lucretia happens, everything just pans out the same. He still ends up being a Turk, he still ends up merged with Chaos, he still ends up going to sleep in the Shinra Mansion's basement. But what then? I mean, we have the pretty basic answer that things won't change much for Vincent. He'll just join the party, and his story will play out as it did in the original Final Fantasy VII. But let's be honest, that's not going to happen. Everyone knows where I'm at personally with this now if you watch the channel, and if you don't, Remake is a sequel. Therefore it is a new story, and the amount of changes that we have already seen, especially towards the end of Remake, kind of demand that the story is different from this point onwards. It might be a gradual change, but it's going to change. That's where I'm at least. So that informs a lot of my theory crafting and the ideas that I have. I'm viewing this as a completely blank slate almost. Yeah, they've got a rough journey that they've already gone through in the original game, but that's not necessarily going to be the same. And because of this, I can't see Vincent's story remaining the same, especially given how absent he was for massive parts of the OG due to being a secret character. Like, even if he's there in the party, on screen, he doesn't really get any moments to shine, or so to speak. And that is purely because he was an additional character, and it makes sense. But Yuffie got Wutai, and that's a pretty huge section of the game if you go into it and you do everything. Like, there's quite a bit of stuff that was in there for Yuffie. It's unfortunate Vincent didn't get as much, but I think that's going to change in a big way now with Remake. And one of the main reasons for this as well is that post Final Fantasy VII, post the original game, Vincent's involvement and importance to the world was amplified significantly. He's not only merged with one of the most powerful beings that the planet has ever created, Chaos, but he also has the proto-materia, which is essential for connecting with and controlling the power of either Chaos or its counterpart, Omega. Now, we can possibly say that Vincent himself is no more important than he was in the OG, and you could maybe get away with a statement like that. But the proto-materia falls into the same class of power as the black materia and holy, along with Chaos being a part of the endgame for the planet alongside Omega. And if you think about it, what is it that Sephiroth has been trying to do this whole time? And essentially, Sephiroth's trying to summon Omega. If Sephiroth's plan remains the same, to wound the planet and gather all of the livestream he can, then the potential for Omega to appear exists, which would then directly involve Chaos. You could almost argue that Sephiroth is trying to take the role of Chaos and return life to the livestream. That's his mission. But then at the same time, he's trying to do a portion of Omega's job and gather the livestream himself. The concept of Omega and Chaos didn't really exist in the original game. In the original game, Vincent had Chaos, that's it. There was no Omega, but the concept of what Omega does definitely existed, because that was Sephiroth's plan. Gather up as much livestream as possible, become a god, leave, that kind of thing. The same in Advent Children as well. The likelihood of Sephiroth not knowing about Omega and Chaos now, especially this future Sephiroth, with all of the knowledge that he lacked in the OG, because, like I say, you know where I'm at with this. I'm pretty much certain there's two Sephiroths. You've got the Sephiroth native to the timeline, and then you've got this other Sephiroth, who seems to have knowledge of the future, seems to have potentially even come from the future, who knows. But if that is the case, if either of those things are the case, he will have understood now and know about Omega and Chaos. And what this would mean is that Sephiroth would probably need to be able to control Omega at some point, or at least defeat Omega at some point. And the thing that he needs to do that is inside of Vincent, helping him to control Chaos, the proto-materia. And this leads to one of many possibilities for Vincent in Final Fantasy VII Remake that I quite like. It's not the only possibility. I'm not saying it's definitely going to be this. There are other routes this could all go. But let's do it. So with Sephiroth knowing that he's going to have to come up with some way to either control or circumvent Omega in order to fulfill his original plan, assuming that his plan remains the same, he's going to attempt to identify a way to accomplish this goal. And it probably won't take him long to find information pertaining to the proto-materia, especially given that, we read everything in the Shinra Mansion. He has to have seen something about it. And you could argue that, he did read something about it, but just didn't attribute any value to it. I don't know. I don't know how they're going to play that off. But if we look back to Dirge of Cerberus, Vincent does find the data in the Shinra Mansion, a place that Sephiroth knows about, a place that Sephiroth knows contains secrets. Secrets that might help him. So let's say that he finds Lucretia's data. If he finds this, then he will then find out about Chaos, and Vincent's connection to it. And like I say, this is assuming that he hasn't already found all this out. There's every chance that he already knows all of this now, after being part of the live stream for so long and seeing all of the events pan out, because we don't know what happens to Sephiroth after Advent Children. So he could just be there watching the events of Dirge take place. Who knows? Now imagine the story continues, but rather than Sephiroth wanting only the black materia or spending his time toying with Cloud's sanity, he spends a little bit of time trying to acquire the proto-materia and discovers Vincent. And if Sephiroth is successful in taking the materia from Vincent, then eventually, if not immediately, given that he is weaker than he is in Dirge at this point in the story, so when he's in the Shinra basement, he's much weaker than he is in Dirge, but eventually, Chaos would take control, and that could have extremely messy implications. Recently, there's been a bit of conversation about an alternative boss we could fight at the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2, because, let's face it, we've already fought Jenova, we're probably going to be fighting Jenova throughout the games like we did in the OG, and we've already fought Sephiroth as the finale of the first game, so Sephiroth has to be left alone pretty much as far as I'm concerned now. We're done with Sephiroth until the end of the story. We cannot fight Sephiroth again, it will just diminish the fight the more we do it. So who? Let's take everything that we just discussed, but assume that once Sephiroth learns of the proto-materia and Vincent, one of two things is true. Either he already knows about Vincent being in the basement of the Shinra mansion, or maybe he's able to detect where the proto-materia is. I'm not too sure. I don't know about the second one, but I think the first one's quite likely, or quite, maybe not quite likely, but quite possible. Now what this means is that Sephiroth can pretty much go and attempt to retrieve the proto-materia whenever he wants. Something that this Sephiroth we see in Remake should have little difficulty accomplishing, especially if he does it before Vincent hooks up with the party. Now this would leave Vincent still paired with Chaos, but gradually if not instantly losing control, and this would unleash Chaos. Couple this with the general belief that the game's going to start and end in Nibelheim, and that would mean that we would need a boss in Nibelheim, the same place that Vincent, and if all of this pans out as I've speculated above, an unleashed Chaos would be. I think you can see where I'm going with this. It doesn't even necessarily mean that we don't get Vincent afterwards and for the rest of Remake, as once we defeat Chaos you could write in that due to Chaos being weakened after defeat, Vincent's able to control it for now, and we're able to defeat Chaos because it's only just awakened and started taking its own control back, so it itself is still quite weak. You know, there's a lot of ways that you could make it make sense. Something like that at least. But Sephiroth could then succeed in his mission to get the proto-materia, and it would mirror his plans in the OG where he spends his time trying to get the black materia, therefore tying Remake back into the OG's narrative, but differently. Similar thing happening, slightly different spin on it. I feel like this could, I kind of came up with this as like a bit of a joke, but now that I've actually sat down and thought about it and gone through it, I think this could make sense. I think this could work because the proto-materia is going to be something that Sephiroth might need in order to have any degree of control over Omega. Chaos would lose control if, Vincent would lose control of Chaos if he lost the proto-materia. We're speculating that the game ends in Nibelheim, so we need a boss in Nibelheim. Chaos would be in Nibelheim. It just all depends how it pans out. I'm not sure if this is definitely something that they're going to... obviously I'm not sure if this is something they definitely do. But as a possibility, I quite like it. I really like it. It gives Vincent immediately more involvement in the story because he needs that proto-materia back from Sephiroth. He will need that. So it instantly ties him into it even more than he already has been. And a lot of these things have been added in the canons of Dirge of Cerberus and Crisis Core and things like that. So, it makes sense to weave them into the remake, and I think it could be something they do. I would prefer a Vincent/Chaos fight than a Sephiroth fight at the end of Remake Part 2, 100%. And Chaos is a beast, so it wouldn't be an easy fight. You could make that fight very difficult. So yeah, that works for me. I quite like that. Roche coming in and being a super difficult boss, that's a little bit out of place. It feels a little bit wild to me. Whereas Vincent and Chaos, this already established final weapon of the planet sort of thing, that could be difficult and justifiably. As far as the rest of Vincent's story goes in Remake, It's difficult to speculate without knowing where the rest of the story is going to go. I would assume that if Sephiroth's plan remains the same, that Vincent's going to be a big part of the end game of that being chaos. Maybe Sephiroth needs to control chaos to return as much life to the live stream as possible. Who knows? It could go numerous different ways. One thing, I don't think we get a happy ending for Vincent. I think we get the same kind of deal that we got in the original continuity so far. So while he doesn't die or anything like that, I don't think he's going to get any big moment. Like he's not going to run away with Lucretia and live on Wutai or anything like that. None of that's going to happen. But I do feel like he will get his closure. I do feel like he will get his vengeance on Hojo again. That's got to happen, 100%. And I think they can do a better job of it this time as well. But anyway, I've rambled on for long enough in this video. Don't forget, leave your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think could go down with Vincent? Do you agree with this, or do you like... It's not a case of agree or disagree, because this is wild speculation. But what do you think? What do you think about the speculation here? Do you kind of feel it? Do you like it? Do you think it could go that way? Or do you have a different idea? Like, drop them in the comments below. Let's get some conversation going on this, because Vincent's a very interesting character. But thank you very much for watching. Don't forget, like, subscribe, comment, all the things. But more importantly than anything, have a great day.